Hello, this is Jeff, back at it again with yet another video overview for our imperialism class. This time, as opposed to going over, one of my major sources, I'm going to be giving just sort of a general overview of my paper, how I came to the topic, what is the point of my topic, how does my topic relate to imperialism very specifically and to our class very specifically. How I've sort of developed the topic as I've done some more of my research, and basically what my final paper is going to be about and how I'm going to write it. So with that being said, let's get into it. As I already mentioned very briefly, I think in my previous video, my topic is going to be on sort of the links between genocide and imperialism. Genocide meaning, of course, the annihilation of sort of a people or culture, or the total wipeout of a people or culture. There's lots of different definitions for that, which I'll get into in a little bit. But, my argument really, my interest in this topic was sort of sparked by our reading on the German treatment of the Herero, how similar that was to the later Holocaust of European Jews in the 1940s. But there's other examples too, right? When we were reading about the treatment of the Lakota and the Comanche during sort of the United States era of imperial expansion during the Indian Wars. That certainly read as very genocidal to me as well. And I became interested in this idea that, you can see these very clear examples of genocide in imperialism. And part of my thesis is that, genocide should be looked at as a strong potential event whenever we're talking about imperialism. And imperialism could be looked at as a strong precursor to the commission of a genocide. You can look at the atrocities and mass killings that were carried out by the British Expeditionary Forces, for example, or the Dutch use of mass killings in Sumatra, and the fact that almost all of the major European powers that we've sort of studied and looked at targeted resources and infrastructure as a way to gain control over local populations. I think that is an inherently genocidal act, and I'll go into that a little bit more. I do want to be very clear here. I don't want to misrepresent my point here that I am not saying that every single time imperialistic conquest occurs, you're going to see genocide. I think there are examples of imperialism where genocide was not really attempted or carried out. The United States and the Philippines, for example, were atrocities committed there, were sort of, did events occur that we would today, I think, very confidently class as war crimes? Yes. But did those rise to the level of genocide? Did they ever rise to anything sort of approaching what happened to the Herero? I don't really think so. So you can certainly find examples of imperialism where genocide did not occur. However, one of the arguments I want to make, and something I do believe, is that imperialism is in some ways an inherently genocidal undertaking, right? And I talked about this a little bit in my last video, but basically what I mean by that is if you're an imperialist country, and you're looking at another country and you're saying, well, I want the resources that that country has and those people have, and I need to take them, and I'm going to go in and take them. Well, the people that inhabit that country might have something to say about that, and they might be in your way. And if they're in your way, what are you going to do about that? I think once you start thinking along those lines, and I think if you're the head of a country engaging in imperialism, you have to be thinking along those lines to a degree. Once you start thinking along those lines, it's a pretty short path to thinking in genocidal terms, right? You start thinking about, I need to get rid of these people, and how am I going to do that? And that's very genocidal thinking, I think. So, I think genocide and imperialism can be looked at as something that's very linked. I also just want to establish that I will be using Raphael Lemkin's original definition for genocide as defined in my handy-dandy book, Genocide, by Adam Jones. I'm going to be using Lemkin's definition. There are many definitions. Lemkin's definition is substantially different from the official UN definition. However, the UN definition and many other definitions used by other countries, I think, are compromised in terms of their integrity, because different agents or different countries wanted certain aspects of the definition altered so as not to look bad and to not have their own history look bad. And, I don't think we should be doing that. I don't think we should be using a definition that was designed to not spread blame on a group of people that may have committed genocide, or a country that may have committed genocide in the past. I want to use a definition that I consider to be fairly encompassing. And I think Lemkin's original definition is that. I think it is very encompassing. I think it does mention a lot of different groups that I could potentially talk about in my paper. So Lemkin's original definition of genocide, I will, of course, define in my paper, and that is the definition that I will be using going forward. So I just want to establish that very quickly. I'll be using, as mentioned, the genocide of the Herero in Namibia at the hands of Germany as a strong example of a genocide being carried out during imperialistic conquest. I already mentioned in my last video, many similarities to the Holocaust. The Holocaust is sort of the classic example, if I can say that, of genocide. It's the example I think most people sort of think of in their minds when they hear the term genocide. It's the famous example, right? And there's just so many similarities to a degree that I actually found kind of shocking when we read that section. And so certainly that's going to be a key piece of evidence that I'll be using, but there's many others, the British, the Dutch, the Americans, the French, there's all these sort of different countries that engaged in a genocidal undertaking, I think, when they went about their imperialistic conquest. As mentioned before, many of them would attack infrastructure or food supplies or water resources or things of this nature to deprive local populaces of food and shelter and the things they need to survive. I believe that is an inherently genocidal activity to be doing. I mean, you are attempting to gain compliance from these local populaces by threatening them with, exposure, starvation, thirst. You're threatening to wipe them out, essentially. You're threatening them with mass death. And that's genocidal. I think by definition, you're attempting to deprive them of the things they need to stay alive. And you're attempting to deprive a massive group of people of the things that they need to stay alive over a long period of time. I find it very difficult to see an argument where that could be argued to not be an act of genocide. Threatening countless lives with certain death through starvation or exposure is also something that is going to, by definition, affect large numbers of civilians, not just the military. So it's certainly a war crime just in that sense, I think, in that civilians are being fairly directly targeted by these activities. We're not just talking about a military tactic there. So yeah, I think we are talking about a strategy that is inherently genocidal. Again, I think imperialism, to a degree, is inherently genocidal. Not saying there's always going to be genocide with imperialism, but genocidal thinking is going to be present when there's imperialism, and that is a key argument I am going to be presenting in my paper. That there is a close link there. The next thing I want to say, I don't want to sound flippant, but mass killings occur quite often in conflict, and many of these mass killings don't really rise to the status of genocide. Again, I think if you look at what the American troops did in the Philippines, I'm certainly not defending it, but was it on the level of what happened to the Lakota, for example? Is it on the level of what happened to the Herero, to European Jews, to whatever, any of these other sort of groups? I don't think so. So imperialism doesn't guarantee genocide, but imperialism requires a degree of disregard for the lives of those who inhabit the land and who possess the resources that the imperialistic nation is attempting to take. By definition, you are looking to take things from these people. And if these people resist, you need to do something about that, right? And that's where that sort of inherent link to genocide comes in. That's where that genocidal thinking sort of comes in. And I think Lemkin's definition and the fact that it's so comprehensive, again, is going to really give me the sort of background and scholarly, argument that I need to make my argument. I said that terribly, but and I just want to quickly say also that there are modern examples of this, I think, and I mentioned this in my previous video as well. The modern Russo-Ukrainian war, I think, is very definitionally an act of imperialism, right? Putin has made comments like, Ukraine, parts of it were historically part of Russia, and therefore Ukraine does not have the right to exist as an independent nation. Ukrainians not having the right to exist as independent people, I think that is a very genocidal statement to make. It's certainly also a very imperialistic statement to make, right? The resources and the land that makes up Ukraine, well, that should belong to us, the Russians. That's ours. And what the people there think about that, that doesn't matter. And if they get in our way, we'll deal with them, right? That's how Putin is sort of looking at it, thinking about that. I think that's how the Russian military apparatus is looking at it. And so there are modern examples, actually, that I can also potentially use in my paper. Decades or hundreds of years after sort of the imperial era, we still see wars of imperialism happening to this day. And, that war has been described as genocidal. And some of the actions that Russian soldiers have undertaken in that war, I think, do rise to the level of potentially genocidal actions. And so that's something that I could maybe bring in as well. Obviously a very modern example, a little bit different, but I think it's worth pointing out. And I am thinking about ways to potentially include that in my paper. It's not going to be a big section, I don't think, but I am interested in potentially including something about that because I think it's relevant. To close out, I'll just quickly say, again, not every example of imperialism may include genocide, but genocidal ideology, I think, is present in every example of imperialism. And given that imperialism still exists to this day, we have a responsibility to watch wars of imperialism quite closely and sort of be on the lookout for warning signs that genocide may be occurring or may be about to occur. And that really is sort of the focus of my paper. So, yeah, I think that's a pretty solid overview. Thank you very much for watching, and I look forward to seeing all of your videos as well.